You're listening to Who Killed Kelly on The Vault. This series is dedicated to the 1984 murder of Kelly Jean Robinson and her family's quest for truth.
I got a phone call. I suppose that day I went outside and screamed. They said she drowned, but they suspected foul play because one of her shoes was over here and one was over there. So she put up a struggle. Grass was all matted down and you could tell there was a struggle. Definitely. She was mighty.
It was just so fishy, that it was such a dead end and nobody knew anything. But it seems like all of these people knew plenty.
These women, had alleged that they warned one another about you, to not go with you in your blue vehicle.
Okay.
And they described these stickers on the window, for sale stickers.
It would be nice to have some of the answers, that we're seeking out, to bring that part of the justice. I don't want anything more to do with this. This is ridiculous. This was 40-something years ago. The guy was 6'3".
He was 6 foot.
If anybody knows something, say something.
This story begins with a DNA test. 2, actually.
Well, it all came to be, so I was turned 40, and I was curious about health history. And so, so Jean, my wife, was kind enough she got the 23andMe, and we did Ancestry as well. Yep.
That's Jeff Lucas. He was adopted as an infant in 1980. Jeff grew up in a loving home in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He never knew who his biological parents were, but that was okay. He had a family. A mother, a father, and a sister. Life was good. And while those familial bonds certainly do have an impact on our health, in a way, Jeff still didn't know what genetic predispositions he was dealing with. He knew taking those DNA tests a few years ago could lead to his biological father and mother. He was prepared for that, and the possible scenarios it could bring. Would his parents still be alive? And if they were, would he get the chance to meet them, to see them, face to face? After a few weeks of waiting, he got the results, which included the name of one person, a woman who was considered a 15% genetic match. What does that mean? In the world of genealogy, that means she was a close relative. So, Jeff reached out and got in contact with the woman's son, who was managing her 23andMe account. His name was David. So
we ended up talking to David. And so David, he didn't really know much. He said, all I'll do is he was big into he still is big into the family tree. And so he emailed us the entire family tree. And it was we printed it out and it was like a ream of paper. And from that, we started looking at it, and to Jean and I, it was Greek. It didn't make any sense. So I'd say a week or two later, David reached out. And he said, I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner, but I think you're Kelly Robinson's son. And I said, I'm not sure who that is, And he said, I can't say much more. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but just Google Kelly Robinson.
So Jeff did. And one story popped up. An article that appeared in a 1997 edition of the Sioux Falls Argus Leader, with a headline that read, 13 years after sister's murder, question gnaws at Beersford woman. Why? The story was about the 1984 murder of a 22-year-old woman whose body was found floating in a gravel pit pond in rural Rock County, Minnesota, and her sister's quest for answers. The victim was Kelly Jean Robinson, Jeff's biological mother. And the sister referenced in the headline, Fighting for Justice, his biological aunt Kathy Moeller.
And then it also talked about, at the end of the article, that Kelly had a son that was given up for adoption, but he was born in January of 1980. I'm like, well, that's me.
From there, Jeff and Jean tracked down Kathy. First, they reached out to Kathy's daughter, Tanya Dice, who told them that her mother had always wondered where Jeff ended up. Kathy had gone decades wondering where Jeff was and who he had become. She still recalls the pain Kelly felt when she made the decision to put Jeff up for adoption at 6 weeks old. Kelly was a single mom and was dealing with a harsh reality. She had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she knew her future was uncertain. Kathy was also a single mom with 2 kids. It was a lot. And Kelly made the ultimate selfless act. She let her baby go, knowing it would cause her pain, but give him a life she felt he deserved. Here's Kathy.
It was very hard. I shed a lot of tears for that. Yeah.
Jeff had gone his whole life not even knowing he had a biological aunt, but he knew life would be different after meeting her.
You're always nervous, and you don't, there was no expectations going into it, but it was just nice to kind of put the pieces together, know where you came from, and, kind of start to identify some of your past.
A few years after that meeting, I wrote a short story on Kelly's unsolved murder. It wasn't a deep dive investigative piece. It was what I refer to as an awareness article. I combed through the archives and checked in with law enforcement to see what was new. Then the story went out to all Forum News Service sites in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. And then, a few months later, in April of this year, I got a message from Jeff's wife, Jean Monty. So I gave her a call and learned all about that DNA test that was taken a few years earlier. They were ready to find answers. She introduced me to Tanya, Kelly's niece and Kathy's daughter, and we decided to move forward together in the pursuit of the truth and justice for Kelly and for Kathy, who spent decades of her life carrying the torch, keeping the flame alive for her sister. Tanya put in a formal request for the investigative file with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. In the meantime, I continued to ask the Rock County Sheriff's Office hard questions and let them know we weren't going anywhere. This case was going to be pursued one way or another. For context, Minnesota law does not require law enforcement agencies to share information from an active investigation with the victim's family or the public. That includes the investigative file. Case files become legally accessible to the public only once an investigation is closed. There is room for nuance, though. Each law enforcement agency has discretion over what to release. It is not illegal for an agency to provide a case file to a family or reporter if they choose. It's up to them to determine what they believe is best for the case. In my experience, though, it is uncommon for families to obtain these files. I've seen families take the matter to court in pursuit of the records and lose. But in this case, the BCA released the investigative file to Kelly's family. And this is what we learned. The Laverne Police Department received a call at 1:59 p.m. on May 28, 1984. A family of hikers had spotted a body floating in a rural gravel pit pond just outside of town. They described her body as floating vertically, with only her head appearing above water. The area where the pond was located was remote. It wasn't a known location or destination. It was only known to locals and only accessible to those willing to wade through shrubs and tall grass. Within minutes of receiving the call, first responders arrived. First, they spotted a pair of blue and white Pro Wing tennis shoes on a large area of matted down long grass, about 12 feet from the water's edge. Then, they saw her, a young woman's head floating above the water's surface, roughly 8 feet from the shoreline. Her bright red jacket could be seen beneath the water. Responders took a boat out in the pond and retrieved her body. She was taken to the local hospital in Laverne. Meanwhile, Rock County Sheriff Ollie Holman called the Minnesota BCA to request assistance, which is protocol in Minnesota for all suspicious deaths. BCA Special Agent Michael J. O'Gorman took the call. He and his colleague, BCA Special Agent Robert Berg, got in the car and made the 3-hour drive to Laverne from Minneapolis. When they arrived, they met with Sheriff Holman at the hospital and conducted a cursory examination of Kelly's body. The preliminary assessment included these observations. Kelly's neck and shoulders were severely bruised. She had fine-line scratches all over her torso. They appeared to be in a sweeping side-to-side pattern, starting just below her armpit and extending down to her waist. And this part was odd. Kelly wasn't wearing a bra or a shirt under her red nylon windbreaker jacket, which was engraved with her late mother's name. But witnesses who saw her last stated she was wearing a shirt. She also had no underwear under her blue jeans, which were covered with grass stains on the knees and the back of the pants. The blue and white Pro Wing tennis shoes found nearby, in the matted grass, they were a fit. They were Kelly's shoes. Before Kelly was identified by family, her identity was revealed through her socks. They were stenciled with her name, Kelly Jean Robinson. Law enforcement called her closest family member, her sister, Kathy Moeller. Kathy's phone rang at roughly 1 p.m. on Tuesday, May 29, 1984, the day after Kelly was found. On the other end of the line was Agent Berg. He had information about Kelly.
I got a phone call. I suppose that day I went outside and screamed.
Berg's call confirmed Kathy's worst fear.
They said she drowned, but they suspected foul play because one of her shoes was over here and one was over there. So she put up a struggle. Yeah. Grass was all matted down and you could tell there was a struggle. Definitely. She was mighty.
Kelly's body was taken from the hospital in Laverne to Sioux Falls, where she lived, for the official autopsy. Her clothes and shoes were taken to the Rock County Sheriff's Office to be dried and held for evidence. Until Kelly's family obtained the investigative file, they did not know the full details from her autopsy. The report stated Kelly had been forcibly held down by her neck and shoulders before she died. Her knees were bruised, with at least one abrasion noted in the report. There were scratches on the palms of her hands, similar to the marks seen on her torso. The physician conducting the report wrote, "The scratches run in more or less a horizontal lane, seeming to indicate walking through or being thrown into some type of bush or brush. A small bruise was found on her scalp." And here is a critical part of the autopsy report. Information that was never relayed to Kelly's family. The examination revealed semen present in her anal cavity. There were no signs of semen on the vaginal swab. They did, however, remove a tampon, which was placed in evidence. Despite the bruising and presence of semen, the investigative file did not state the possibility that Kelly had been sexually assaulted. In coordination with the death scene investigation, the autopsy report labeled Kelly's manner of death as homicide. Because Kelly's body was found in cold water in May in Minnesota, the pathologist did not determine a definitive time of death. A toxicology report showed no alcohol in her bloodstream. That means that, at the moment she died, she had no alcohol in her system. This part of the report stood out to me. We'll get to this later in the series, but multiple people told law enforcement they saw Kelly drinking alcohol on the day she went missing, on May 26, 1984, 2 days before she was found dead. In the late afternoon, she fell asleep in a flower bed outside of a sandwich shop, according to 3 witnesses. We don't know what her blood alcohol content was on the day she went missing. Considering she passed out, it could have been quite high. And if it was high, it would have taken a while before it went back down to 0. And whoever killed Kelly did so when her blood alcohol did go down to 0. And we're not just relying on a blood test from 1984 here. Analysts with the BCA also extracted fluid from Kelly's eyeball, which was considered a more accurate detection method for blood alcohol content. The results confirmed the blood test. And here's the thing. There was no time of death determined, and there was one full day Kelly went unaccounted for, May 27th, the day after she went missing, and the day before she was found. Yet as I read through the investigative file, I noticed law enforcement consistently questioned potential suspects about their whereabouts on May 26th, the date she went missing, not May 27th or even the early hours of May 28th. And just to clarify, to this day, some of the people still living who were once considered potential suspects were never asked where they were on May 27th or where they were before 1 p.m. on May 28th. Before we get into the timeline of events on the day Kelly went missing, I want to talk a little bit more about Kelly, to provide some context as to what was going on in her life when she was killed. In the months before Kelly's death, Kathy was worried about her sister. Her MS had progressed rapidly and impacted every aspect of her life, including her mental health. Kelly, who once aspired to be a nurse and a mother, wasn't able to carry on with the life she once hoped to live.
She was a go-getter. She was happy most of the time. She had her moments now and then, of course, like everybody, but toward the end there, she lived in a pretty small world with her MS, and, when she was diagnosed, and it progressed pretty quickly.
The reality and progression of the disease had been the driving force behind her decision to put her son, Jeff, up for adoption. She did what she felt was best for his future. The decision broke her heart, though. She moved to a Sioux Falls apartment and started hanging out with a rough crowd. Eventually, she fell into drug and alcohol addiction. Kathy tried to convince her sister to move back to her house in Beersford, and she did, for a while.
She was living downtown here, Sioux Falls, and I was uneasy about that. Yeah. And I told her that. She came and stayed with us for about 6 weeks.
But eventually, Kelly craved independence, while she could still have it.
And then she came back up here and got the apartment downtown, and I'd go up to see her, and people are looking out the doors, and it's just like creepy. I said, I don't like you being here. She goes, well, I can afford it. It's fine. I'm not afraid.
Kelly was in and out of active addiction. She joined Alcoholics Anonymous and would stick to sobriety for periods of time. She sought psychiatric help alongside MS treatment. Yet, at the end of her life, Kelly was struggling. She turned to sex work to pay for drugs and alcohol. Like many other sex workers in Sioux Falls in the 1980s, she worked primarily out of a popular downtown establishment, the Frontier Bar. In the days after Kelly's death, the BCA called on the Sioux Falls Police Department to help with the investigation on the ground. And they did a lot of work. The investigative file includes 20 pages dedicated to just names referenced throughout the file. Friends of Kelly's, regulars at the Frontier, and every potential suspect considered, along with their employers, parents, friends, ex-wives, ex-girlfriends. They were thorough at the start. Here is what they learned. Kelly was last seen between 5 and 7 p.m. on Saturday, May 26th, leaving the Frontier Bar in downtown Sioux Falls. 2 witnesses told Sioux Falls police officers, who were working in coordination with the BCA, that they saw Kelly getting into a blue vehicle resembling a 1974 Ford Torino, with a white man in his early 30s, around 6 foot tall, with light brown hair, wearing a red jacket. The witnesses, who worked at Max's Inn, a neighboring bar, knew Kelly. 2 months before she went missing, she lived in an apartment above the bar. With this in mind, Sioux Falls police began looking for men who fit the description of the killer, a man with a violent history who frequented the Frontier Bar and drove a blue-colored car. And because the area where Kelly was found was only accessible on foot and only known to locals, they were looking for a man who was strong and familiar with Laverne. The investigation gave way to a number of potential persons of interest to look into, and it also allowed investigators to create a timeline of Kelly's last known movements. Kelly left her downtown Sioux Falls apartment on May 26, 1984, at around 11 a.m. with her on and off again boyfriend, Levi Lawrence. On her way out, she stopped to call her sister, Kathy, from a payphone. Kathy remembers this phone call. She was out working in her garden in Beersford, and their younger brother answered the phone.
Yeah, I was down in the garden and I guess it was my little brother that answered the phone. I said, tell her I'll call her back, because the garden was way down the driveway, out on the farm. And I said, tell her I'll call her back.
Kathy was never able to speak with Kelly again. Kelly went her own way at around noon without Levi. She went to the Frontier Bar and asked her friend Barbara for some money to buy booze. Barbara had been encouraging Kelly to leave sex work behind and offered to loan her money in lieu of taking male clients. Barbara wasn't there, though, and Kelly left. An hour later, around 1 p.m., Levi and a friend saw Kelly walking away from the Frontier Bar, which was on a stretch of the street in downtown Sioux Falls, surrounded by other bars like Night City. She had $7 in her pocket. Levi admitted he was pretty intoxicated, but he told investigators he recalled Kelly talking about a man who was bothering her at the bar, a man who bought her a few drinks. Levi assumed she pulled a quick trick with the man in exchange for the money, and he thought Kelly told him that the man wanted to take her somewhere. Kelly, Levi, and a mutual friend used the money to purchase beer, which they drank together downtown. Then, things got a little violent. Levi told investigators he hit Kelly in the back or stomach. It wasn't out of the ordinary. Levi had developed the reputation of an abusive boyfriend. Kelly got upset and took off. It was the last time Levi said he saw her alive. Kelly was seen hours later in the late afternoon, passed out in a flower bed outside of a downtown sub shop. Levi and his friend heard about this and went to check on her, but when they got there, she was gone. A bartender from the Frontier told investigators she thought she saw Kelly that Saturday at the Frontier at around 5 p.m., but she wasn't 100% sure. She thought she could have been thinking about Friday, too. That did line up, though, with the two witnesses who told investigators they saw Kelly leave the Frontier Bar at around 5 to 7 p.m. with a white man in a blue car. So you might be thinking, did investigators look into Levi, the boyfriend? They did. In the hours after Kelly went missing, he went back to her apartment to look for her. One of Kelly's friends saw him and backed him up. Levi was also surrounded by a lot of people that day and night in public areas. He also had no access to a blue vehicle. He didn't even have a car. And he wasn't white. He was Native American. We ran a background check on Levi to see if he was still around. He died in 2012. As for other potential persons of interest, investigators began to gather a list of men who fit some or all of the suspected killer's criteria. And there was one individual whose name kept coming up. 5 female sex workers, interviewed separately, each stuck their neck out to tell the cops there was one man they feared, a regular at the Frontier Bar. And they all had similar stories. They described him as an odd guy, a car salesman, who had a reputation of being violent with the women once he would get them in his blue car. All of the women who told the cops about him were able to pick him out from a photo lineup. The women warned one another about him, particularly the new girls. He tended to prey on the younger, newer workers. There was another commonality among the women's stories. The man had a very consistent demand. anal sex. Investigators had a strong lead to follow. A confidential informant pointed the car salesman out to investigators at the Frontier Bar on June 6, 1984. For this podcast, I'll refer to him only as Donald. Donald was briefly questioned by police officers outside of the Frontier Bar that night. They noted that he drove a 1984 blue Ford Escort. He didn't have an alibi for the night Kelly went missing at that time. Agents with the BCA decided to take a closer look at the salesman and brought him in for another, more official round of questioning on June 26th. But before they met with him, the Sioux Falls Police Department ran his name through their system. Records showed Donald had been associated with 3 alleged incidents, all sexual in nature, although he was never charged. In one case, in 1972, he passed a polygraph, while in another, he claimed to be making crank calls, asking women to pose in their underwear. Then, in 1984, the same year Kelly was killed, a woman told law enforcement officers she escaped from Donald's car after he picked her up on North Minnesota Avenue in downtown Sioux Falls. He allegedly began grabbing at her, and the woman escaped. Here's what was written in the report. Quote, "When she tried to exit the vehicle, he told her that if she did not do exactly as he told her and stay there, that he was going to punch her in the mouth. He continued with his pawing at her until she was able to escape from him and get out of the vehicle." End quote. Yet when officers attempted to contact the alleged victim, they weren't able to find her, so charges were never filed. These past incidents, in addition to multiple statements given by sex workers, piqued investigators' suspicions. The investigative file includes the full transcript of their conversation with Donald. Investigators put out photos of Kelly on the table. They asked him if he recognized her. He said no. He was asked again, and again, he said no. He did admit to frequenting the Frontier Bar 2 to 3 times a week, and a neighboring bar, Night City. Donald told investigators he drove 2 vehicles, a blue 1984 Mustang, owned by the car lot he worked for, and his 1984 blue Ford Escort. They didn't exactly look like a 1974 Ford Torino, but before investigators sat down with Donald, they visited his employer, who said he did have access to all of the cars on the lot. Donald denied taking any of the other vehicles. Investigators told Donald what the women at the Frontier Bar told them about him. He denied it. He said he was never violent, never requested anal sex. He wasn't surprised, though, when officers told him he didn't have the best reputation among the women there. He theorized it was probably because he didn't do something he said he would do. Donald told investigators he had only been to Laverne 3 times in his life, once within the last year. A friend interviewed in the investigative file said Donald was pretty hung up on a girl from Laverne, who he had dated in 1982. He was, according to his friend, pretty upset that she broke it off. I spoke with that woman. She was shocked to hear that he was upset that she broke it off. She recalls only going on a few dates. Unlike the first time officers spoke with him, when Donald sat down with investigators, he said he did remember what he was doing on the evening of May 26th. He had an alibi. He and a friend, Dave, spent the night on the town, first at a ball game, then at a series of bars and a late-night diner before returning home. Donald said he remembered what he was doing on the evening of May 26th because the next day, he and Dave watched the Celtics game. Considering it was a month after Kelly's murder, and it was 1984, it was tough for investigators to check the alibi. They hadn't written any checks, and bartenders aren't going to remember what night a patron came into the bar a month earlier. Investigators also asked him about the afternoon of May 26th. He couldn't recall if he was working or not. When the officer asked him if he knew what he was doing before he went downtown with Dave, he said, "No, not at all." I recently spoke with Donald. Twice, actually. Once at his home and once over the phone.
So do you recall when I was at I knocked on your door?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so, we had talked about how the family obtained the investigative file.
Yep.
I asked him a series of questions. For clarification, Donald is now in his early 70s. He was in his early 30s when Kelly was killed.
So you do recall when they spoke with you?
Yeah.
Okay, and I know when I was there talking with you, you had said that you never knew Kelly.
Correct.
We talked a little bit about the evening Donald went with Dave. I noticed something he said here that he didn't tell investigators. He told me Dave drove him home in his vehicle. Donald said Dave then took his car home that night.
So you had said that Dave drove your vehicle that night, the night that you guys went out?
I drove there, and then he drove home.
Oh, okay. And how long did he have your car for the next day?
He came over and watched the Celtics play with my dad and me, so 11 o'clock.
I also had to ask Donald about the women at the Frontier Bar who told investigators they were afraid of him.
But do you know why investigators spoke with you?
No.
Okay. And do you recall anything about them saying that there were different women in the Frontier who told them to speak with you?
No.
Okay. So I do want to just give you a chance to address this because I think that it's only fair. But, according to the investigative file, they spoke with you because as they began to talk with some of the sex workers and dancers at the Frontier, there were at least 5 of them that we have in the file, named and unnamed, who did say that you had developed a reputation of being violent with the women, the sex workers.
I doubt that.
Yeah, I'm just saying what's in the file based on their interviews with these women. Do you know why they would say that, or why that was, the claims they made?
No. I don't know anything.
No, and I understand. I understand, sir. I'm telling you because your name is in the file, so I guess I'm giving you an opportunity to address some of these allegations that were made.
I told you before. I don't know. But go ahead.
Okay, so these women, had alleged that they warned one another about you, to not go with you in your blue vehicle.
Okay.
And they described these stickers on the window, like for sale stickers.
Okay.
And you had worked at a car dealership. So these women were given, a number of photos, and they had picked you out as the woman or as the man they were talking about. So that is why, investigators did end up interviewing you, according to the file.
Okay.
I asked Donald about what I consider to be one of the critical parts of this story, as uncomfortable as it was. It's really what led investigators to his door in the first place.
One more thing I do have to ask you about, and I apologize for the nature of this question, but when the autopsy was conducted, they found that Kelly had semen in her anal cavity.
Okay.
So the women who talked with law enforcement, who said that you had a history of being violent, also said that that was your specific request of the sex workers.
I doubt that, but okay.
Okay, so I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to that because, obviously these were allegations that were made against you. So these are what the women told law enforcement. We have that in the file.
Okay.
So are you saying, is that inaccurate?
Inaccurate.
Okay. And yet, did you make some of those women mad back then?
I'm sure we did.
Okay.
I mean, we were young and stupid.
Aside from the detail about his car ride home the night Kelly vanished, Donald's story was pretty much the same as the one he gave officers in 1984. After I read the transcript of the BCA interview with Donald, I looked for the next one. Surely they talked with him again.
And till you started asking me questions, nobody'd ever asked me another question.
Maybe took a DNA sample? At that time, in 1984, forensic science was being used in criminal cases to identify blood type grouping through semen samples. Basically, they could take a semen sample and determine the ABO blood type of the source. It wasn't enough to definitively tie a person to the crime, but it could rule out a potential suspect. Or, if the blood type identified from the sample lined up with the suspect, it could strengthen the case. But no, there was nothing. No more interviews. No request for a DNA sample. No search of his vehicle or home for Kelly's shirt, bra, or underwear. They seemed to be done with Donald after the two witnesses who saw Kelly leave the Frontier Bar on May 26th were shown a photo lineup of potential persons of interest. Independently, they both chose the photo of the same man. And it was not Donald. It was a man from Laverne. Check back next Friday for part 2 in the series Who Killed Kelly? Interested in checking out images from the case file and Kelly's family? You can find a link to our site in the show notes. If you are looking for a simple way to support the work we do at The Vault, leave a 5-star rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps give the podcast search visibility, which means more coverage for the cases we cover. The Vault is a Forum Communications podcast. I'm Trisha Taurinskas. Thank you for listening.